Cory, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. That's a good setup and a good tee up for everything we're going to go into. So as we move into the demo portion and kind of want to set the stage a little bit, today we're specifically going to look at a business-to-business registration scenario. And it's one that I think we're seeing more frequently, that it's reducing the friction for end user sign up. At the same time, integrating that registration with a more complex business process, and integrating it with the end-to-end brand experience that the business wants to present. So we're going to look at kind of the request portion for B2B, integrating this with an ITSM centric solution for business process management around the review and approval process, ultimately tying that back into Okta to enable final access. Okta actually plays a central role in this entire piece. That's why we kind of refer to it as an identity-centric approach to B2B registration and approval and enablement, focused heavily on that customer experience brought together by Universal Directory and Okta's extensive API. We're trying to simplify that self-service process and extend Okta and the identity throughout the business process. While we're looking at ITSM specifically right now, we're going to actually look at Jira Service Desk. It's important to really understand that this is not just a Jira Service Desk integration. This is a ServiceNow integration. It's CRM, it's e-commerce and marketing platforms. We can come back to this kind of at the end to give an end-to-end view of how the architecture of this works together. But for now, let's go ahead and flip into the nuts and bolts of the demonstration. One of the other pieces we're going to be looking at today is a challenge that we see frequently, which is getting end users, especially customers, to sign up for multi-factor. And one of the approaches we took with this was to integrate multi-factor authentication as the actual only form of authentication using Okta's ability to chain factors together. In this case, we're going to look at one factor, but we simplify that registration process by putting multi-factor authentication in as part of the initial sign-up process before the account is ever actually enabled. Instead of boring you with filling out the entire form, we'll do a little form magic and come in with a new account, filling out the form the way we normally would. However, right, versus a consumer perspective, we're actually looking at this being more data being collected from a B2B scenario. So think of this in terms of partners or distributors or suppliers where they may be uploading financial documents, right, or providing additional contractual information. We are using this downstream for routing and approval process when we go through the overall submission and bring that in. The next step that the user is actually going to see is that mobile enrollment. This is all Okta's API, actually enabling this initial registration and validation. And once we've verified the SMS factor, that now becomes our primary authentication mechanism. At this stage, we have actually created the user at Okta, we have staged them, and we have assigned them to the multi-factor authentication with SMS. However, they are placed in a sequestered group, meaning that any Okta administrator or user that enables that user doesn't actually grant them access to any downstream application. That all happens with the B2B process integration. So when we start looking at how does this integrate with that business process and the review and approval, we really say, we've got a registration request that's come in. We can start work on it. And the other piece that we can actually go through here is see all the information that they've entered and provide fixes to this. This one's a little arbitrary, but like I said, this can be the contractual contract documents or financial agreements, additional review and approval, with two-stage approvals. Anything that actually comes through that business process now is separate from the initial identity creation, but all of that ties back to the identity using the Okta user ID, so that when this is finally approved or rejected, we know exactly what account to update, and we use our middle tier API layer to communicate with Okta and assign them to the appropriate group or groups and activate their overall account. The group and groups are then associated to the choices made in the business process. So think about B2B onboarding with ServiceNow or B2B onboarding with CRM and assigning users to various roles that then translate into Okta roles and Okta provisioning that gives different customers access to different applications or different rights. So on final approval, we just use Jira's webhook approach to fire back off to the API using the Okta user ID to update that original user. And then go through the login process on the Okta side or the application directly. They have been placed in a group that is SMS only authentication. Again, no password for this account. When they actually receive their SMS code that they registered during the registration process, they're able to verify and authenticate. In this case, we're going to actually just take us into the end user settings and see that the information that we updated without the user on the Jira Service Desk side also has flowed back into Okta so that their profile is more accurate. I think this becomes an important piece when we start looking at marketing analytics and e-commerce integration, or especially supplier e-commerce integration for B2B, of updating additional roles and rights that the user may not know or the user may not have any access or information about, but really drives what their ultimate end user experience is. All of this tied to the identity means that we can get that 360-degree view of the customer driven by their ID, especially across devices, and really enrich that customer profile. That comes back to the overall architecture diagram. In this case, this middle tier API is what's orchestrating the behavior between Okta and the Jira Service Desk components, but none of this could really be possible without Okta's broad API and the ability for us to very easily and remotely control that and orchestrate those decisions and have that level of standard in place. And with that kind of wraps up that portion of the demo, and I'll hand it back to Shane to you for any Q&A.